welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother, John.
Hello.
He has picked a random video of the unknown unexplained to show to me and get my hot take on the situation. What do we have today?
Today we are covering a topic that is fairly broad in scope called the Mandela Effect.
Okay. Nice. Let me jump into it.
Who is this person? Wrong. There is no Elvis Presley, and there never was. This rock and roll icon's name is actually Elvis Presley. Now, of course that's not true. His name is Elvis Presley.
Did you just admit to not knowing what Elvis Presley looks like?
To be honest, I have never paid much attention to Elvis Presley. I just know he was a guy, kind of fat, sang rock and roll a long time ago.
Okay.
I'm not into the music scene.
Okay.
But the
you could've shown me that
earth-shattering
picture and it
feeling you
would've been
just
any guy.
experienced is what some might call the Mandela Effect. And you're going to want to buckle up. The Mandela Effect is a real phenomenon described as when a group of people adamantly believe an incident or experience occurred that never did. Scientists at the University of Chicago described the Mandela Effect as, quote, an internet phenomenon describing shared and consistent false memories for specific icons in popular culture. They found that it is both empirically observable as well as, so far, having no clear explanation. The term was created by a self-proclaimed paranormal consultant, Fiona.
Okay, so I am familiar with the Mandela Effect.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it actually has an official definition, but it could be something that could have several definitions, and this being kind of one of them. I find it interesting that it specifies it as an internet phenomenon, as in maybe it didn't come up until the internet was a thing and people could kind of share their experiences to the point of actually finding out that this was occurring.
Yeah, I would imagine that nobody ever knew it was happening before because there was no way
there wasn't
to
enough
check
common ground for people communicating enough to realize, oh, hey, I remember that thing. Wait, that thing isn't that thing?
Yeah. The internet just gave us the ability to communicate on a broad scale with the general population.
Yeah.
Broom in 2009 after she discovered she was one of many people who wrongly remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, while the South African civil rights leader lived on until 2013. In one of the most popular instances of the Mandela Effect, people adamantly claim that there's a 1990s movie about a genie called Shazam, and starring actor and comedian Sinbad. The obvious explanation would be that those who remember this are simply confusing this with the 1996 film Kazam about a genie starring Shaquille O'Neal, and conflating it with one of the several Sinbad movies from the same time. In a smaller instance, take a look at this image of the Pokemon character, Pikachu. Many fans of Pokemon remember the character as having a yellow tail with a black tip. However, Pikachu's tail has never had a black tip. The Mandela Effect has also shown up in instances regarding how people remember movie lines. For example, one of the most widely quoted movie lines in the Star Wars franchise is spoken by Darth Vader in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Many people remember the line as, "Luke, I am your father." However, the words spoken are actually, "No, I am your father." Similarly, in 1937, Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and although many people still quote the line, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all," this is not actually spoken in the film. The actual line begins with, "Magic mirror on the wall." Now, I must mention that
Sorry. I think it's easy enough to misquote Disney movies when they're consistently misquoted by everybody.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I think part of it is that a misquote that is close enough to the real quote starts kind of getting misquoted, because that's how people talk about movies. They'll talk about the most famous quotes, but then the misquote gets repeated enough times that it sort of might form a memory of its own.
Yeah, I mean, once things become misquoted, it's easy enough to just remember them as being misquoted, and people misquote stuff all the time. So that I don't see as being particularly unexplainable.
But there might be other effects a little bit more harder to...
I worked at Blockbuster in the year 2000. Blockbuster Video. And there was a movie called Shazam starring Sinbad.
Like,
that's how I remember it.
100% you are certain.
Like 100%. I put movies away all day long on the shelves at Blockbuster. I remember the movie, the cover of it and everything. It didn't look like what they showed there.
Well, yeah, that was just a mock-up.
Yeah, that's not what the cover looked like. But it did have Sinbad on it. And some little kids.
So, yeah, it's just one of those things you remember, but...
Right.
Because I remember Kazam, but I had never seen the Sinbad Shazam deal.
Let's see what else he says.
That I too have personally experienced this phenomenon. Like many others on the internet, I grew up with a popular children's book series that I thought was the Berenstain Bears, only to find out that it is now, and always was, the Berenstain Bears. But how could this be? Some believe the Mandela Effect may be due to the many worlds or the multiverse theory of quantum mechanics. In this
I'm sorry to keep interrupting. Have you ever heard it called the Berenstain Bears?
I've never heard it called the Berenstain Bears. I remember those books from when we were kids.
Yeah.
I remember the title, and my memory does say Berenstain Bears.
I've never heard anybody pronounce it Berenstain Bears. I will, honestly, I was a little kid. I've never actually looked at how it was spelled on the cover, but I've never heard anybody say Berenstain Bears.
Yeah.
Theory, people like Broom are not misremembering, but instead, their reality got crossed with another. Though it's now popular in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the many worlds interpretation theory was developed in the mid-20th century and basically states there are many worlds which exist parallel to our own in space and time. The theory was originally developed by Erwin Schrödinger as a way to explain a phenomenon in quantum physics and purports that there are no alternative outcomes to events. All outcomes happen simultaneously. In 1955, Hugh Everett, a then PhD student, introduced the idea of the universe, quote, splitting into alternate versions of itself when faced with a quantum choice. Each possible outcome of a choice creates a new universe, and these universes are identical up until the moment where the event is triggered. It might go without saying, but just in case, quantum physicists in the 1950s developed the many worlds interpretation theory to explain experiments in quantum physics, and not the Mandela Effect. But by this logic, both timelines, the one where Mandela died in prison and the one where he lived until 2013, exist, but in separate realities. Those who remember one reality but find it didn't actually happen are not misremembering. They may have lived in one universe and somehow switched into another, or reality itself has shifted. But since there's no Doctor Strange or Green Goblin in the real world, how and why might our realities be shifting so wildly? A popular explanation for how realities are shifting involves CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Some believe that CERN is conducting experiments that have caused us to enter an alternate reality, and their Large Hadron Collider is at the center of this conspiracy. The Large Hadron Collider, which opened in 2008 and was recently turned back on in July of 2022 after a hiatus, is the world's most powerful particle accelerator and was created to help scientists better understand the structure and building blocks of the universe. This idea has gained traction on TikTok, where a supposed whistleblower has gone viral making claims such as, quote, CERN is opening parallel dimensions that causes the change in climate. It has long been the topic of fear and conspiracy, but when it was announced it would be going back online, some conspiracy theorists and fans of Netflix hit sci-fi comedy musical show Stranger Things spread rumors that it would open a portal to an alternate universe. As more conspiracy theorists have started discussing CERN's work on TikTok, CERN particle physicist Claire Nellist has taken to responding to some and sharing more about her work with the Large Hadron Collider. I've seen a lot of videos going viral making claims about CERN, and when I see that, it tells me we need to communicate even further because they're getting informed by the conspiracy theories they hear. But not everyone believes we're living out the plot of
Poor CERN. they catch so much flack for
just basically putting up an experimental thing for colliding particles.
Essentially, they're catching a lot of flack for doing stuff that regular people don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's too bad, because they do some really interesting stuff and some really interesting work. It seems like they shouldn't have to come out and be like, yeah, we're not
causing parallel realities, really honest.
Right. We don't have to cause parallel realities. Parallel realities already there. Like,
but they're not opening portals to it, you don't believe?
No. Although they may be able someday, and I hope to be able to actually provide some sort of proof people will accept.
Time will tell.
Of Marvel's Phase 4 or 5, I don't know, I can't keep track anymore. Some people have a more technological approach and think we're actually living out the plot of the freaking Matrix. As explained in a video that I also made, and is, in my opinion, worth a watch, some believe that reality as we know it is simply just a simulation, and that we are either being controlled or confined by other beings. This scientific theory can be traced back to a seminal paper about the simulation argument from 2003 by Nick Bostrom, but the theory was widely introduced to many people by the 1999 science fiction movie, The Matrix. The concept of a simulation even has its roots in ancient works like Plato's cave allegory or Zhuangzhou's butterfly dream. If there were an error in the simulation and the programmers fixed it, it could lead to false memories, offering a possible explanation for the Mandela Effect. As is theorized, a simulation might be created to see how we might react to certain situations, and alternatively, the mistake could actually be on purpose, as our programmers might hope to make us suspicious to see how we might react to that. Essentially, any awareness of a simulation could in fact be part of the simulation itself. What makes many of these theories compelling is that although you cannot prove them, you also cannot definitely disprove them. The biggest flaw in the idea that the Mandela Effect is caused by the many worlds interpretation is that the theory only works along the understood lines of quantum physics if information cannot be transferred across worlds. So for the same reason the idea seems plausible, it must also be rejected. As for CERN's work with the Large Hadron Collider, the board of the International Mandela Effect Conference has said CERN is just as valid of a theory as any other at this point. However, one of its members has also noted that the, quote, earliest Mandela effects were happening long before CERN's Large Hadron Collider fired up. In response to conspiracy claims, a spokesman for CERN said, quote, CERN's research captures the imagination of lots of people, which is why CERN has been featured in a lot of science fiction books, even movies around the world. But excluding the idea that we might be living out the plot of the Multiverse of Madness, Stranger Things, The Matrix, or any number of the Cars movies, there are possibly real-world explanations. According to a 2020 study in the Journal of Psychological Science, 76% of adults made at least one detectable error when asked to recall information. Even though most test subjects scored very high, most people's memories are still capable of making even a small mistake. Some believe that the Mandela Effect is the result of our brain reconsolidating memories. MRI research has shown that memories are stored in our brains nearby to similar memories. Caitlin Amott, a neuroscientist, explains, quote, memories are organized in the brain so that similar memories are stored in nearby neurons. When a memory is recalled, those cells are able to change their connection, which allows for the addition of new information. But because neurons that fire together wire together, sometimes false memories can emerge from erroneous connections. For example, if you learn that Alexander Hamilton was a founding father at the same time you learn that he was not president, but other founding fathers were, you are more likely to misremember that Alexander Hamilton was president, because neurons fired when asked about Hamilton were also fired when asked about presidents. A popular example of this could be found in the case of Nelson Mandela's death. In 1977, another anti-apartheid activist, Steve Biko, did die while imprisoned. Both Biko and Mandela were leaders with similar achievements. It is therefore possible that people who remember Mandela dying in prison have actually just woven the memories of these men together. Additionally, the internet might be participatory in a certain amount of suggestibility. According to Amo, suggestibility is the tendency to believe what others suggest to be true. This is why lawyers are prohibited from asking witnesses leading questions that suggest a specific answer. There is also research to prove that when false information is given to us by someone else, it can actually weaken the fidelity of an existing memory. So if someone was to suggest that you had read the Berenstain Bears, your brain might create a memory of you doing so.
Like, before the internet, I doubt everyone individually decided that their least favorite word was moist. Perhaps prior to Reddit, people might have met stinky or rat trap with similar disdain. And I'm sure if given enough time, you might also be able to come up with an instance or two where large groups on the internet have fervently formed communities around, to put it nicely, wrong information.
Yeah.
Another theory might also be that people just can't admit when they are wrong. According to scientists, many people tend to believe their own memories over someone else's. This could be due to ego protection or cognitive dissonance, the state of knowing conflicting information but still resisting a change in opinion or behavior.
Whatever the
I know
reason,
somebody like
this
that.
one's a real head-scratcher. It also seems that each instance of these false memories could have their own case-specific explanation. What we do know for certain is that at this moment, all we have is the here and now. So be nice to yourself and everyone around you, and maybe nobody will misremember you as being anything but.
Alright.
So that is sort of in general the Mandela Effect.
Right. And we will put a link to this video in this person's channel in the description. Please go check it out, support the original channel.
So your thoughts on what the Mandela Effect might be?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. For a short video, they actually brought up a lot of stuff. So there's a sort of a lot to unpack about it.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it is entirely possible to overwrite or rewrite your own memories.
Oh,
People do it all the time.
Memory is a very inspecific and often inaccurate thing, especially the further away you are from the origin point of the memory.
Right, and you continue to add to it, and it can haunt you. People ruin their lives and their own feelings, replaying memories and escalating the memories to the point of something that it wasn't initially or didn't need to be.
Yeah.
So it is completely possible to override your memory of something and make it a different memory. People do it all the time.
Which also plays into the suggestibility, because if you let's say that you're watching a late night comedy show that's doing a skit that quotes a movie, but the late night comedy show got the quote wrong in the skit, but now you just remember the skit's quote rather than the actual movie quote.
Right, exactly. Just like, Luke, I'm your father. Like, I'm sure that that's just that it's been misquoted for so long that, you know, people remember it that way. I've never heard anyone say Berenstain Bears. It's always been Berenstain Bears.
I've never once heard Berenstain, but it isn't impossible
that could be Western American people pronouncing things wrong, or however they feel like pronouncing them off of a book cover.
Because it's like, I mean, I remember reading those books, but it's not like I was paying super close attention to how the...
No, we were little kids.
Yeah.
So that's... I don't know about that. I do know in instances where people are super convinced, where like I feel like I know that movie with Sinbad happened. Like, I have memories of Stocky putting it back on the shelf.
And your memories feel real enough that it's hard to imagine that you just made that one
Correct.
up.
Or like with Dad, our father is convinced that he watched Fallout like 2 years ago. Like,
yeah, the new Fallout show that just came out. Our dad is absolutely convinced that he saw it like 2 years ago. Like,
right. Yeah.
On some late night streaming service, and it's like, no, that just came out.
Yeah. So for the people that are affected by it, they're like, no. And that's an odd one, right? Who else is on the internet saying that?
Yeah.
Nobody. That's just that's a one-off with him. So I do think that a lot of it can be memory overwriting, because it's absolutely a thing that happens. It's absolutely a thing that humans do. But I think there are instances of it that don't feel like that's what's up.
Like,
you know what I
it's
mean?
just not, that doesn't quite fit as oops, just a slightly mismatched memory.
Correct. And you also have, I think that this instance is closely related to deja vu as well.
I get deja vu a lot.
Yeah, that absolute feeling that you know that this already happened. And I feel like maybe the two things, if we're going with a multi-universe sort of a theory, may be related. Let's talk about multi-world theory, like they're talking about. Multi-dimensional theory is what they're talking about. And we're about to get into my hot take. But from what I've gathered from being out of my body, from skipping universes, from I do this stuff in astral states, right? Take it or leave it. But it's not that there's a billion different dimensions. This is still too much 3D thinking. It's that self consciousness is a multidimensional personality. Yeah. So every universe that you're experiencing is a different aspect of self. Does that make sense? No. Say it better.
I'm trying to put it together in my head.
Right. Well, it's difficult to explain things that there aren't really concepts for yet. But if you imagine self, we're going to get into this. It'll start to sound a little bit like the Matrix theory as well, although you can skip all of the programming, all of the alien feeding battery thing. What? I don't know where they got that from, but thinking of the world as if it's a construct. Each individual self, you, me, everybody else, is in their own individual construct, experiencing things differently. Right? Like there's people in Afghanistan having a completely different life right now than what we are. We're all having our own experience. The experience is the construct. If we step back from the 3D reality, how do I explain this? Think of self like it's more like an apartment complex. So what we're doing right now is looking out the window of an apartment, our apartment. But if we stepped back from the window, we would find that we were in our own apartment. If we turn around and face the apartment, the walls, the ceiling, the floors of that whole apartment is this life's experience. It's all of the memories, all of the experience that goes with this life. But an apartment isn't alone. It's on the same floor with a bunch of other apartments.
And there's a bunch of different floors to that apartment.
It's the infinite apartment complex of self. So all on the same floor of that apartment, what you have is the other versions of self. All of the different choices you could have made, all the timelines that splits off into.
Different room in the apartment.
Is a different room in the apartment, right? Self is all happening simultaneously at once. It's like what they quoted that guy, was it Schrodinger, the particle physicist? Who is saying that everything is actually happening simultaneously. Yes. All versions of self playing out their timelines simultaneously, but it's all self. So what happens is if you make that choice that shifts things, then you shift apartments. You're apartment hopping along your own floor, basically. And if you make a big jump, then you end up with a weird offset memory, like Shazam or Kazam. Really, the only difference is one was one guy, one was the other guy. It wasn't a huge difference.
When you moved from one apartment to the other, you brought something from the previous apartment with you.
Right. Usually you're stepping into the whole apartment, so you're also stepping into all of the walls, the ceiling, the floors, all of the memories that are contained within that experience. You're shifting into that perspective.
But now you brought the couch from the other apartment.
But you brought the couch or a pillow or a wall hanging from the other apartment. Exactly. It's the same thing as deja vu. You get that weird feeling like this part feels like I did it already. So you have those weird little overlaps where it happens. But realistically, every time we make a choice, a decision, we move our lives in one direction or another, we're apartment hopping among the apartments. which is normal. It's just usually a smooth process that we don't notice. At some point, we can get into what's on the floors above and below, but that's not a part
That's
of
a different discussion.
That's a different discussion about the apartment complex itself.
Okay.
But essentially, their multi-world theory is actually a multi-self theory. It's a theory of consciousness hopping between all of its timelines in order to experience different pieces of it. But it's possible to bring little chunks of it here and there. Like you said, maybe somebody brought their favorite pillow into the other apartment.
Or heck, just something that you kind of forgot you left in your back pocket from the other place.
Right, exactly. Little things like that. Did that make
It makes sense.
Okay. So I think that's 100% possible. I think it's why deja vu, and I think it's why you end up with things like, see, deja vu is a very personal thing, right? That's all your own personal experience overlapping. So when you have something like the Mandela Effect, where a bunch of people remember that there was a Shazam instead of Kazam or whatever it is, right? How do you get so many people who jumped timelines from one to the other?
And brought along one very specific piece of furniture from the other apartment.
Right. That's an interesting thought process, right? Because how do you have so many people that remember it that way?
Yeah, it's odd, and it makes me wonder, like, is there something about that specific element that, why would that affect so many people? Is it a more important element? Is it that element have that kind of sticky effect on everybody? Because it clearly doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a lot of people.
The only working theory I have for that is when collective consciousness, so the world, all of us, makes a big shift. And we do have those events that make a big shift, turns world events, changes things, right?
Yeah.
What you have is a whole bunch of people who make one decision and a whole bunch that make the other, right? So you do have, again, it's a theory, instances where the whole timeline is changing. Something has shifted the timeline. Something is going to be happening now in this timeline. And the people who are going to stick with that timeline, who are made their decision and are sticking with it, stick. And the ones who are like, yeah, no, shift out. And so you may have certain instances where collective consciousness is shifting the timeline of the whole trajectory of the timeline, where you have a bunch of people that kind of migrate in one thing. But I don't think that that's nearly as common.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it doesn't happen that, like, particularly often.
Right. Again, the internet age is still young. You know what I mean?
The sharing of information
Right.
is still new.
The internet age is still fairly young, so we don't have that many recorded instances of anything like that.
More time passes, the more stuff like this might crop up.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to keep an eye out for and look for.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the Mandela Effect and my sister's take on the Mandela Effect.
That's my hot take on the Mandela Effect. Let me know what you think. If you think I'm crazy or if you think I'm onto something. Let us know if you have suggestions for videos that we should check out. We also have an email address, unravelmyexperience@gmail.com. So if you want to send us an email with your own weird experience that you haven't been able to explain, feel free to do so. We'd like to feature them on the channel eventually. And please check out the original channel.
Yep. You all folks all have a good evening.
Thanks. Bye.